Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, a sprinkling of philosophy, organizing psychology, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, MysterE. So, MysterE, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm going pretty good. And look, this is a topic that you had covered on streams before, but I kind of feel like we've gone full circle on this topic because it's it's kind of relevant with everything that's been happening with Iran and the midterms. Like, are they or aren't they going to happen? So
Yeah.
maybe with like. Because would you say maybe we can start this conversation with a question? Do you think like there's strong ties between Project 2025 and the Dark Enlightenment?
I do. I do, rather. I would say that it insists upon itself, 4IS. What? It insists upon itself. As in, like, Project 2025 is like the manifestation of a neo-reactionary movement without realizing it's neo-reactionary, if that makes
Right.
any sense at all. Probably not. Let me explain it. The neo-reactionary
Yeah.
kind of culture is like I say a newish right-wing kind of movement, which is kind of brought upon by people like, Curtis Yarvin, so Mencius Moldbug, like the philosopher of the tech bros or the brothers of tech. And like, the thinking, the philosophy behind someone like J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, et cetera,
Yeah.
Mark Andreessen, potentially. He's like, Curtis Yarvin is kind of ingrained in Silicon Valley culture and provides them with like kind of a radical underground philosophy to justify their worldview. And there's another guy called Nick Land, the accelerationist. Like these guys are like seminal neo-reactionaries. And neo-reactionaries are, as the same name suggests, they are new reactionaries. And like the reactionary in this case is like not reactionary against, I don't know, like commies or socialism or something revolutionary like that. It's like neo-reactionary as in reactionary to like the bourgeois revolution, like to liberalism itself and the idea of the Enlightenment. So you've probably come across, like, I think the listeners would have come across the idea of the Dark Enlightenment.
Yes.
And so the Dark Enlightenment is hand in hand with neo-reactionary culture. And so I believe that something like Project 2025, like people are like, oh my God, it's like conservative craziness from the Heritage Foundation. How do we end up here where they're basically advocating for an all-powerful executive? That's really how large parts of Project 2025 are structured, and the language that is brought into it is like, how do we get power back to the president? Because like the way that America used to be was like, the president was basically the supreme leader. To carry some language that we've been making fun of recently, the president was kind of like a supreme leader. And like, yes, you had the legislative power, so you have Congress, and yes, you have the judiciary system, so you have three powers. But really, the president had like, he was a supreme leader. And like there was more power in that position, and that has been eroded over time because of increase in federalization, federal departments. So like the Department of Justice, the Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, like all of these departments have come up, and they've got their secretaries and they've got their technocrats in them, and so they're sapping power through federal departments away from what used to be all centralized in the president, basically. And so like everything, they'd have a coterie of advisors, but they'd have heaps of power. And so like now all of that gets devolved to a bunch of technocrats. So like Project 2025 is about centralizing power in an executive authority. And like, neo-reactionaries for us, you know what they want? They want like what Curtis Yarvin wants. They want like a CEO king. They want America to be run like a corporation. And they want a CEO they want a board structure. They want an executive group, and they want an executive group that elects amongst themselves. They pick the CEO, and the CEO rules as a king, like a supreme leader executive position, like you'd have in a corporate organization. And they're trying to instill that. And like Project 2025 is like neo-reactionary light. It's really calling for like, someone like Trump to come in and regain all the power that's been lost to the technocrats and the various bureaucracies, and like, yeah, you know, and like rein in Congress, rein in the judiciary, and get rid of all the woke rubbish and the DEI, and bring like power back to like, you know, a supreme leader, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I would also posit the fact that it's not really about, well, with neo-reactionaries, it isn't just about the wokies and DEI and bringing the power back to the CEO king. You don't get neo-reactionaries if you don't have the stagnation of well, I guess this was something we were discussing today in the stream. You don't get the stagnation that's happened under neoliberals and the I guess the sharpening of the horseshoe in the horseshoe theory. That, you know, the more that I guess the more fragrant or maybe extreme the analysis of the horseshoe, talking about, oh, you know, the point of the radical left and the point of the fascist right, and I don't mean objective fascism. I mean, you know, the throwing around of terms left, right, and center about what is fascism and what isn't fascism. It's created a sharp point for the radical centrists where they're just commanding the middle, and it's like, no, we must keep the status quo. We must keep the status quo. But if you don't have that stagnation of the radical centrists, then would the neo-reactionaries have really come around? If there was no, if, you know, the politicians through policy actually sorted out the housing crisis, sorted out the cost of living crisis, would the calls for a CEO king even happen?
Yes. It's the crisis of what? Radical centrist policies through neoliberalism, where they pick these kind of like cookie cutter politicians who are dull as hell, don't say anything. They speak a lot without saying anything at all, which is push people to the kind of extremes in the political sphere where they're questioning the entire system altogether. And they're not doing so in a revolutionary sense, which is like, how do we move beyond the current system and, you know, basically improve the current system. So like democracy, the idea of getting people involved in the political process isn't the problem. It's the fact that like largely capitalism with neoliberal ideology has failed people largely. There was a sense of progression before, like especially after World War II, after the destruction, for a lot of the industrially advanced world, there was this idea that like, okay, like we've seen the chaos of industrial society, we can push forward and produce a society that is like kind of more abundant and like has more ability and option for more people. We can factor more people in and like create a more humane existence. And then like neoliberalism came along, kind of co-opted that because people got a little bit like more wealth focused and focused on kind of their self-interest as opposed to furthering humanity's interests. And like that turn, that kind of self-interest, individualism almost, like kind of really manifested itself in this idea of privatization at all costs. And the privatization of everything has led to the austerity measures that have happened under neoliberalism. And so instead of people doubling down on being more humane and like trying to figure out a society that like actually utilizes the wonder of our productive forces, like our industrial capacity to produce like, you know, more abundance for everyone, like a more, like I said, like a human rights based approach to society. What they're saying is like, look, the whole system has actually failed because of the neoliberals and the radical centrists you're talking about. The whole system is shit, and like everything's a problem. Let's just go back to when we had like a supreme leader, a class society, basically. Let's go back to having like a group of people, like an aristocracy who sit above everyone else, dictate society, and like they'll just make the right decisions. It's democracy that has failed, not the economics of the situation.
Yes.
And so like their view is it is reactionary. Their view is like, It is the Enlightenment principles that have failed us.
Mm.
And the Enlightenment principles like kind of go in hand with this idea of liberalization. So like focusing on freedom and like real individual rights, not individualism, but individual rights and freedoms, and like creating a tolerant society and accepting society and trying to broad scale, like to do that en masse. They're saying those ideals have failed. And they look towards kind of illiberalism as a testing ground for that, like something like Viktor Orban's Hungary. Like he prides himself on
Yeah.
his illiberalism. So he's like basically the same kind of, you know, political structure that you have in liberal democracies, but without any of the liberal tendencies, which is like, you know, equality. So like, you know, gender equality, sexual liberation, like to name a couple of important factors of a free and liberal tolerant society. They do away with all of that stuff. They have a very conservative approach, but they still have that kind of the politics that goes hand in hand, you know, like elected representatives and stuff like that. But like he still kind of likes to run things like a semi kind of dictator almost.
Yes,
And
and
so,
people, and also people, like I'm sure some people know, it's where Trump got his MAGA quote from. "Make
yeah,
America
apparently,
Great Again" was from Viktor Orban.
yeah, that's a sentiment from Orban. And so like Trump is a big fan of Orban, but like his take is illiberalism. And so like illiberalism, Project 2025, like all of these are kind of like the unrealized, unconscious, subconscious, potentially manifestations of the Dark Enlightenment, this rejection of kind of the Enlightenment culture, like this idea that societies should be based on like liberal ideals, and like democracy comes with that. And so like democracy has failed because look at what's happened. We've got like, you know, mass migration concerns, the destruction of our cultures and our identities. We're having crises all over the place. Globalists have come and taken over. It's like, you know, what world are you living in? Like this is, this was on purpose. And it was like, you know, the people that are complaining about globalization, especially the neo-reactionaries, who are like usually people in the Western world, let's be honest. They're the ones that have greatly benefited from the globalization of the world economy, but like whatever,
Yeah.
like, you know, they reject all this type of stuff and they want to go back to a simpler time, but they know they can't go back to like, I guess, you know, the like time of the divine right of kings before capitalism. They're not going to go back to feudalism exactly, but they're going to integrate into a capitalistic economy a CEO style of societal organization. So the politics of democracy, the demos, is gone. People had their chance, and as Peter Thiel has famously said, who is, I think, a very big champion of Dark Enlightenment ideals, freedom and democracy no longer kind of exist in the same realm. You can't have freedom and democracy anymore. They're no longer congruent. If you really want to have freedom, you're going to have to say goodbye to some democracy.
But say, like, even look, this is something that I've been thinking about lately, and this might be a bit of a tangent, but I hope you can see how this is relevant. But just with the premise that you're kind of stating there, that in capitalism, democracy's done its dash, and now in the 21st century, we need to establish this neo-reactionary thinking, and you know, we've had the Enlightenment, and now we need the Dark Enlightenment. And like with my thinking lately, I've noticed how it's really important not only to ask to have the right answer, but also to ask the right question. And with those kind of assumptions that I just stated before, it kind of makes a massive assumption that that democracy was a huge part of the reason why we have everything today, thanks to the 20th century. When, you know, what was the main factor of the development of what we started with at the beginning of the 20th century to the end of the 20th century, when everything was neoliberalism? And I wouldn't necessarily say it was democracy. I would say it was industrialization and the ability to industrialize your populace, and then I guess at the very end in the neoliberal area, shift that off to I guess developing countries where you can make more profit, and uh, it's more the people winning the fights that they needed to, whether it's via unions, whether it's via, hey, convincing FDR, hey, you should probably consider what these communist, socialists, and anti capitalists have to say. Otherwise, America's not going to last much longer. The democracy part has been a byproduct of the industrialization process throughout the 20th century. So I guess where I'm going with that is that, well, we eventually led to a neoliberal system where it was where uh, whatever whatever established bourgeoisie parties you had, they eventually ended up being captured by all of the big multinationals, or at least well-established companies, so they can extract profit from society around them. And to have, I kind of feel like, to have the idea that, oh, democracy is what failed you, and you really should put it into the hands of the aristocracy, or the necessary technocrats, in order to achieve what is best for society, kind of misunderstands 20th century history.
Yeah.
Look, that's a very broad stroke version of what I've been thinking about, but I kind of feel like it's based on a false premise.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's what is interesting is the idea that like what you were playing with before was like democracy. Was it like, what is even democracy then in this context? Like, if we're talking about the Dark Enlightenment wanting to replace democracy as the political organization of the economic mode, which is capitalism, so a free market economy, and how you politically organize that. Usually we have democracies today, but like we haven't always had industrial capitalism done as like democracies as we think them of today. So the democracy that was around at the time of like the Industrial Revolution for a country like Britain or America or France at the time was a democracy that was made up of, it was definitely a bourgeois democracy, but it was like made up of males, usually white.
Yeah.
And like to begin with, just the ones that had property or paid taxes. So they had to have money. So they had to have a position in the economy. So if you think about that, like that's pretty much what the Dark Enlightenment is talking about. The Dark Enlightenment is basically arguing that like kind of democracy shit up because like you have too many fingers in the pie and like it becomes inefficient because everybody has a say or a participation somehow. And should they? Really, if you want a CEO king, you want a CEO king to come in and sort out all the bullshit, make executive calls, and like, you know, direct the economy, which seems to be failing. But like if you look at bourgeois democracy as it was set up originally in the industrial era, not pre-industrial, but like industrial era, it was okay, you can have participation for men and they got to have money and property or some type of economic status. And then as industrialization got more and you had working people actually fighting a little bit more, working people got the working men, let's be honest, working men fought for like basically universal enfranchisement for men. So all men, didn't matter if you were the right color or had the right property or wealth status, you got the vote. And then those working men would have worked, not all of them, but like they would have worked hand in hand with like women, who would have argued for gender equality to get the vote. And so then you had the large scale universal enfranchisement of all of the adult population, not just half of the adult population. So like what happened over the 20th century, which is what you're arguing, starting in the beginning of the 20th century, would have been the opening up of democracy actually to universal enfranchisement, the voting rights, the political participation of the entire adult population. So if you're a citizen and you're an adult, you can be part of the political process. And so like, I think there's a correlation with what you're saying. Like as we have industrialized, we've also like hand in hand, there's been a correlation with an increase in democratic participation, like political participation of the masses.
Yes,
And so
but that's
as
yeah.
yes, yeah,
All I was going to say is that's the reason why I framed it as a byproduct. Like that wasn't necessarily, as an economic mode, as a structure.
mm,
The whole point of capitalism is to increase your profits. It's not necessarily as a benevolent system to
allow political
get
participation.
yeah, exactly, or
Mm,
to make sure that you have the right representative in parliament. It's
yes, yes,
because if that was the foundation, then Mussolini's corporatism and fascism
mm,
wouldn't have the people or the capitalists that were involved with him. They wouldn't have been so ready to align themselves with him, because they would have been like, oh, but democracy, like
mm.
capitalism is about the profit. It's not about the democracy.
Yes, but like, isn't it interesting though that like in the pursuit of profit, like when you actually have like kind of you only have healthy free market society or healthy capitalism going on, in the pursuit of profit, it's usually in tandem with increase in productivity. Increasing productivity means technological revolution and change that increases like the productivity of the average worker. So they produce more. There's more value being created by society, potentially more value, more wealth for everyone. And it's actually what we were seeing was as capital was getting more productive in the 20th century or the turn to the 20th century, there were more people looking for their own political liberation and got involved in democracy. And as soon as you started to see the stagnation that comes around at the same time as
Mm.
neoliberalism, you started to see the stagnation in capitalist productivity, especially as like the Soviet Union starts to dip away and there's no competition with the
Mm.
free market or the capitalist world anymore. You start to see stagnation of capitalism, which is what we started to see. And now we're feeling the direct effects of this stagnation of capitalism, because it doesn't have to be competitive anymore, and it's just more about the profit as opposed to the productivity. And as the productivity's gone
Mm.
down, but the profits have continued to rise, meaning more inequality levels, so like wealth, income inequality, the rich get
Mm.
richer, the poor kind of stay the same, if not go backwards. You're actually seeing a degradation of democracy. So like
Mm.
the less productive capitalism is and producing value for everyone, basically, the more you
Mm.
see people pushing against democratic involvement, like universal enfranchisement. So as people get more and more pissed off with the system, you see less democracy. And so like that's what you were explaining basically with like, Mussolini
Yeah.
and the rise of fascism in the 20th century. Like that was on the back of the Great Depression. That was the
Yeah.
basically the biggest crisis that world capitalism had ever seen. And on the back of the sheer
Mm.
devastation of the Great Depression, you had an almost complete destruction in certain parts of the industrial world, and like the throwing away of democracy. And you kept the capitalism, but you got severe authoritarianism, if not totalitarianism, in these systems.
Well, just as a quick aside, though, that it was actually kind of depressing, because I remember reading Clara Mattai's the Capital Order, and she actually does
Is
explain
is is
how.
that the one the lady that we've been watching in streams, Clara
Yeah, pretty
Mattei? That's
much.
her. Yes. Okay. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, that's her. That's her. Like I've read her original book, and it's really fascinating. I'll have to give it to you sometime. But
Mm,
yeah, with that book, it's actually quite depressing, because they initially did get incredibly democratic, as in the communist parties and the socialist like bloc, if you will, in Italy actually did seize the means of production in the north and certain parts, and they actually were successful. And I think it was like around 1921 and that sort of thing. They were successful, but then unfortunately things swung again on the pendulum to the right, and the black shirts and all of that, and the paramilitary, which led to Mussolini and corporatism, took over. But like it actually, there was a bright beginning until the dark cloud of fascism swept over Italy.
mm,
But
mm.
it was actually hopeful at first. but they just went into a completely different
But
direction.
isn't it funny though that it's the economic forces that seem to be the determining factor there? Like you can struggle against the machine all you want, in a sense, but like if you don't have the economic backing of the system to support you, it will seek to reproduce itself as an economic mode. So the capitalist class I'm talking about, and they will throw away democracy as fast as they can to save the system that economically benefits them. And so people might get really democratic all of a sudden, but if that threatens the existence of like the capitalist class, their ability to reproduce the economic system that they need to survive, then they're more than happy to bring in the fascists to do their dirty work. And they use the fascists actually to break up the socialists that you're talking about and the communists that you're talking about, to smash up the working class who are looking to democratize the economy itself.
Yes. But I guess kind of just linking that back to what we were talking about in the Dark Enlightenment, what I find most fascinating about the idea of the CEO King is, well, look, it's going full circle with the Enlightenment anyway, because, well, at least antiquity, if you will, because Socrates in Plato's Republic talks about the philosopher king and how do you make a just society, and he settles on this all-knowing being called the philosopher king, and look, he uses it as a stand-in, uses it as a stand-in of like, well, if you want a just and perfect society, you kind of need this perfect being. So, is it possible to build his republic? But it's curious that, from antiquity to the Enlightenment, we're getting to the Dark Enlightenment, that suddenly your Mencius Morbug, your Curtis Yarvin is pushing forth the new philosopher king called a CEO king, and just give up this democracy, and everything will be fine for you guys. Just put it in the most capable hands. It's basically the what would you say that the Dark Enlightenment is the advocating for technocracy, or is it a subversion of technocracy?
Well, see, I would say that it's definitely advocating for technocracy, but like there's multiple ways I would say that you could advocate for technocracy, and like they're taking the very like hierarchical approach to it, as opposed to a diversification or a decentralization of power. So like you could have a technocracy where you just set up your society based on centers of knowledge. So you could have people that make scientific decisions because they're from a scientific community, people that make decisions about healthcare and the management of your healthcare system in society because they're kind of they're healthcare professionals, like, and so on and so forth in that order. Or you could have it centralized. And like what we're talking about here is you have a CEO king who makes executive calls, and they're like answerable to a board, and the board has all of these underlings underneath them who are all a bunch of technocrats, like you would have in a corporate organization. But like you basically have an executive that has all power, but like, yeah, they're supported by a fucking army of bureaucrats and technocrats. So like, yeah, it's a form of technocracy, because I think that what they understand is technocracy is the way to move forward in an advanced industrial society. Like there's not, like, democracy for them is inefficient, not just because it has people involved, but because it's slow as a decision-making process, because you have to come to some type of consensus, or you have to form coalitions to get things through. But like technocrats, they kind of, they're experts in their field, they debate amongst themselves, and like they'll make the right decision based on their expertise. And so like they'll put a report, I guess, to the board, and the CEO will make a call. And so like it's a support structure based on technocrats, but like you have one person, like, kind of in the hierarchy that makes the ultimate call. But you can have technocracies that don't have to have a supreme leader, let's say. Like look at China, for instance. I think China's a really good example of an actual like kind of technocracy. I think it's actually more technocratic than it is socialist. Like people will argue with me on that one for days, but like maybe we can do a podcast on that. But like Technocracy in China is kind of like, well, like if you want to be involved politically and you want to organize society in China, then like you have to join the Communist Party. And so like, yeah, you have to know about communism and you have to know about like Marxism and stuff like that, basic entry level stuff to get into the party. But like most of the people that are politicians or like active politically, like that take up key positions in the Communist Party in China, they're all like engineers and scientists.
Yeah.
They're not like, they're not people with a fucking business management degree. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
they're not like marketers and like
they're not a bunch of lawyers.
They're not lawyers. They're not. That's like the backbone of bourgeois society, right? They're not lawyers. Like they just want to get caught in contracts and like fighting over semantics. They're like engineers, like people that want to fucking build shit, and then they want to come up with solutions and they want to plan for stuff. And so like it's a political party which is highly democratic if you think about it. Like it's not democratic as it's open to everybody. You have to be in the party, but within the party, it's very democratic because they they have to basically seek office and get elected and network and all that sort of stuff. But like usually the people that get promoted are people that are technically minded. They're technocratic in some way. And so like those technocrats get pushed through the system because like the party itself comes up with objectives and like plans for things. And then they need a bunch of technocrats that can actually manage that process and see it through. And so you need people that are technically minded to do that, as opposed to like people that are just like politicians, like career politicians that you get in bourgeois society that like, live to win the next election cycle. These people don't, they don't survive by winning the next election cycle because they're good career politicians. They win the next election cycle because the party said this is what we want done in this time period, and they over deliver. That is like as technocratic as you can fucking get. Do you know what I mean? Like that's an expert in their field that is delivering and delivering and delivering and delivering, which is what a corporate structure is supposed to produce, right? People get their bonuses because they over deliver. But like that is not the way that China has set it up. This is party politics as opposed to a CEO and organization, a corporate organizational structure. So there's two different things. But I would say, yes, the Dark Enlightenment is actually a nod to technocratic society and technocrats, because like this stuff is being pushed by who? The tech bros in Silicon Valley. And what are those guys? They're just a bunch of technocrats. They're a bunch of people that have like, within a generation have made themselves one of the most powerful forces within the global bourgeoisie, so the global economic ruling class, because they're like the new billionaire class. They're new money. They're nouveau rich. And like they're not fucking there because they were born into that world. They built it up for themselves. It's probably, working in mum and dad's garage, like kind of thing, the rag to riches story all these tech bros tell themselves, kind of thing. Like they're technocrats, really. And so they want a society that suits their interests. Like they've grown up and like built these massive empires for themselves. They think they're goddamn geniuses. And so like the corporate structures served them well and allowed them to stay on top. And so like basically they think society should be run like that now. Like the corporate structure is what gives them their power, maintains their power. And so and that's served them well. So like, why not have society remade in their own image as a corporate structure? And so like they're large proponents of this whole Dark Enlightenment thing.
Okay. Well, with having considered all of that, like what does it mean for the Dark Enlightenment with Trump 2.0, the possible continuation of the forever wars with starting a war with Iran. Hey, even just around the corner with the midterm elections, because now if Trump plays footsies where it's like, am I going to put ground troops or am I not? Like, does that give him a right to completely call off the midterms? Does this? Are they going to achieve stopping democracy in America?
Yeah, it's a good call. It's a good question because, like, the general sentiment I think that people have, like the broad masses of society, left, right, doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum, if you are politically conscious at all. I think everyone generally has a understanding that, like, the system's failing, that political system is failing. People have a disdain for the establishment, political establishment, like the government generally, whatever the government means, but they don't feel like they can trust politics at all. And so, like, that sentiment harbors itself in this idea that, like, people question democracy itself. Like, what's the point of all of it? And, like, you know, let's just get in a strong man who will just fix up the place. So if people think that mass migration is an issue, then let's get a strong man in to fix that. If people think the economy sucks, let's just get a strong man in that's going to make the right choices and fix that shit. Like, you know, so, like, there's this sentiment, I think, generally across the world at the moment, the Western world, that is. And, like, I'm including, like, you know, places like Japan, Korea in on that. Like, when I say Western world, I mean, like, the free market world. But there's this sentiment, because it's hand in hand usually with, like, the idea of liberal democratic society, that, like, you know, that system has failed. And so, like, people in the struggle to find answers to all of that are, like, kind of are willing to put aside democracy itself to get in a Mr. Fix It or a Mrs. Fix It in some cases. Like, look at Japan. And so, like, people are willing already to buck the system politically. And then, yes, you have the rise of authoritarianism kind of around the world at the moment. You're seeing that. You're seeing, like, I don't want to blame it just on the right because I don't entirely believe in this. But, like, you're seeing the rise in populism and, like far right kind of governments and, like, elected persons. Like, there's a big push for, like, far right or nationalistic parties who are populist, basically, and they want to make the nation great again. And that's the general sentiment in the population, is, like, system's broken. How do we fix it? Maybe democracy is the problem. And these people who are, like, basically authoritarian, that they're, like, playing within the system at the moment, they do threaten to bring in authoritarianism. And so authoritarianism is anti-democratic because, like, democracy is supposed to be about, like, you know, somebody coming in for a set period of time on behalf of the people. They represent the people. But authoritarianism isn't that really at all. It's just, like, one or a very centralized group of people having like pretty much absolute control over everything. Now, some people are happy to pursue that, and I would say, like, the narrative I've constructed so far, like, people are willing to give this a go. And that's what you're seeing with Trump, I would say, at the moment. Like, the Americans, for a large part, like, they do feel, like, completely screwed over by society. And I think this is the result of the neoliberalism that we've seen over the last 50 years. And so, like, Trump can do some outrageous shit and, like, literally threatening to cancel the midterms. Like, he's actually drafted up executive orders which kind of allow him to make a call about whether he federalizes the election process. So, like, which is what at the moment is conducted state by state in America. They're all in charge of their own election organization, let's say, for federal level elections. All states look after their own voting interests. He wants to centralize that. And if you centralize that, like, with a guy like him, like, you know what that means. Like, they'll be able to tweak it. So, like, the real question I find at the moment with Trump is, like, whether or not you'll have legitimate elections anymore. So shout out to Jag. That's a theory that has been propagated, and, like, really, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Trump is going to undermine the elections. That's a big liberal democracy thing. Like, someone like, you know, Orban would, like, really pay homage to that. So people would accuse people like Putin of doing stuff like that. People accuse, like, you know, Mr. Venezuela, Maduro, like, they accuse him of, like, not really running fair elections and stuff like that. And so, like, you know, usually illiberal countries, like authoritarian ones, they have elections, but, like, everyone knows, like, who's gonna win, kind of thing. So, like, they have elections for the ceremony, but there's no substance in the elections. And so, like, Trump could just be that type of authoritarian, or he could just cancel them altogether, and, like, that'd just be, like, kind of full Dark Enlightenment style. Like, look, democracy is bullshit. Let's not even pretend to just, like, all rock up and vote. We all know who the winner's going to be, and it's going to be me. And get used to it. I'm going to be in for life now. And so, like, I think that, like, you can only have, like, what I'm trying to paint here for us, it's not just because you have a strong man that comes in and it's just like, I'm going to do CEO King now. Like, you actually have to have the degradation of the system to such a point where people have entirely lost faith in the idea of democracy itself. And so they're willing to just hand it over to someone like Trump. And so, like, yeah, I think it's possible that, you will never.
But do you think the American people have gotten to that place yet?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think, and this is what I'm saying. Like, I think they're walking blind to this one. I think, like, there's not enough people in America that actually care about politics. There used to be more, and there's not enough people on top of that understand what's going on. So, like, it'd be actually really easy to just have, like, ceremonial elections. Like, they basically already have ceremonial elections in the US, let's be honest. Like, they have a two-party system, but, like, pretty much captured by a very small interest group. And so, like, when you have a Democrat in or a Republican in, like, I'm seeing double. Like, it's hard to really call differences between the two of them. But like now, it, like, that'll just devolve again or degrade again into, like, pretty much just like sham elections kind of thing. So, like, at the moment, like, at least you actually have, you could say at least the only thing they do have is actually elections. You don't actually get to pick your ruler, but, like, at least you have elections. Like, as soon it's just going to be like sham elections kind of thing. And then that will devolve again or degrade again into, like, full neo-reactionary stuff, which is just like the erasure of the electoral process altogether. And so, like, I think it'll be gradual. And yes, the American people, like most people, intergenerationally, if you really want to change something, you don't just do it all at once. Then people get upset and they fight you. But if you just erode their freedoms over a couple of generations, they'll never know it happened at all. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, the boiling the frog and turning up the gas on the boiler with the frog in the water. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, like, that's how I see it. Like, I think the midterms will be one of those crucial points in American history where, like, in 50 years or something, people will be like, oh yeah, that was the one in 2026 where, like, like, it was already bullshit before that, but, like, that was not a real election. Trump federalized the election or something like that. He had ICE agents hanging out at polling stations in, like, major cities.
Yeah.
And so, like, no one who was not, like, perfectly Caucasian looking showed up because they were terrified of being thrown in the back of a van and taken away. And, like, everybody who else bothered to show up, it was just like, it wasn't a real election. And, like, it was like there was no mail-in votes, which is what they're threatening. You had to re-register. Everybody had to re-register. And so there was a lot of people that fell through the cracks.
With a license.
And then you have to show ID as well. So you have to re-register by proving you're a citizen. And you have to show ID. Like, all of these little steps, like, really constrain who can show up. And then, like, let's just throw on top the idea that, like, at the federal level, it's all done electronically. And, like, somehow, like, it's fucking Peter Thiel and the boys who own that system, It's the Dark Enlightenment men themselves, the brothers of tech, that, like, own that infrastructure somehow. It's like the billionaire class that owns that infrastructure. And they just, like, press the button and, like, Trump wins by and the robot vote is in. And Nixon wins by a landslide. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
like that. And then, like, people around the world are going to be like, yes, sure, America, you had real elections. And, like, let's be honest. I think, like, I read a book called Hidden Where It Hurts, where there's this, like, kind of Democrat political strategist who kind of analyzes why the Democrats sucked so much and got hammered by Trump. And, like, she basically boiled it down to, like, out of the entire voting population or the entire adult population in America, like, there's really only, like, 1 million people that have really switched on to politics at any one time. And so, like, if you only have, like, so many people that are switched on to politics, like, more people get out and vote, don't get me wrong, but there's only so many people that actually give a shit and pay attention. And so, like, if you only have like a very small fraction of the voting population in the US who actually cares about politics in the first place, then, like, you know,
Mm.
you're only dealing with a very small amount of people that might be like, hey, that wasn't a real election. And everyone else will be like, shut up, back to TikTok. And they'll just like start doom scrolling again. Like, no one will care
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
us. Like, you try this 100 years ago, people more kind of politically involved, more democratically minded, like, and politically savvy, then, like, yeah, I think people would have been more upset. But like after generations of consumerism, hyper commercialization of society, people just generally disillusioned with politics, and I just don't think they like. They'll be like, "Hey, we were watching that." Like, that's as upset as they'll get,
Yeah.
and then they'll just go back to their consumer lives. It's like it's ripe. It's ripe
But
for this type of stuff. You know what I mean? The conditions
yeah,
are right
so
for this type of stuff to happen now.
right, yeah, because I you know I don't know whether you thought I was being serious or not, but I like in the streams I've been like, okay, this is how BRICS takes over. Like, you know, we'll have we had the introduction of Project 2025. We have them taking over Venezuela and then invading Iran, and then yeah, like whether the midterms go ahead, but eventually there's an eroding of democracy in America, and yeah, my at least my pitch was um, market economies go belly up in the next 3 years or so. Yeah, China steps in as the world's merchant, and BRICS takes over as the as a multi-party world establishes itself, and then yeah, we have a new hegemony. That was at least the idea I was positing, that you know, as what would happen in the next 5 or 10 years. Whether that actually happens is a different story. But yeah, I guess put that one in a capsule and see whether it's still relevant in 10 years' time.
Mm-hmm.
But
What I think is interesting is like when you listen to someone like Marx talk about like how like historical materialism, for example, for us. So for the listeners, like historical materialism, kind of this idea that history is a process. It's not random. It's not just like a bunch of like amazing people that have done some awesome things that have changed history in the course of history and human development. Human development is human history progresses and the human race develops along economic grounds. So like, you know, you had like primitive communistic societies where we're all like, you know, hunter gatherers. And then we started moving into a higher form of society, and that evolved into like an economy based on slave labor and like a slave system. And so the entire economy was based off like the trading of human beings and trading of human labor. And then we moved into a feudal system where humans were kind of tied down to the land, and you had an aristocracy that controlled the masses of people who were tied to the land and the realm and all that sort of stuff. And then you move into capitalism where people are more free, and so they can seek wage labor wherever they want, but they work for a capitalist class or a group of people, and they sell their labor. They're more free. And so they're not tied to the land, they're not slaves, but like they have to sell themselves to the system economically. And like that's the basis for like developments and jumps in history, and why we have different epochs and stuff like that is because they're economically the way we sort ourselves out along kind of class divisions almost economically. And then all the stuff that happens on top of that, the amazing historical events and nodes and, you know, politics and all the exciting and sexy stuff sits on top of that economic mode. But like the like an important thing that like he kind of draws light to, and he does it well in the Communist Manifesto actually, is like, you know, the politics can express itself in any way. Really, the economic system itself is just the base, and politics can sort itself out any way possible. So like you can have like in a free market society, in a capitalistic economy, you could have many different like ways of doing politics. Like fascism is just one of those options. Liberal democracy is just one of those options. Like
yeah,
communistic party politics, like, towing the party line and having a centralized party. Like that's just one way of potentially figuring out capitalistic economy. Having, I don't know, a dictator and a supreme leader with a religious government, like in Iran. That's just one way of figuring out a free market society. Like there's all these different ways of politically organizing society that sits on top of the base, which is what is the fundamental way of organizing the economics. Like how does society reproduce itself, like feed itself, house itself, provide all of the things that it needs in order to continue its existence. And that's done through the market and through capitalism and like the accumulation of capital, so i.e. and like the profit system. But like on top of that, politically, how do they organize themselves? There's probably, there's infinite ways potentially to organize that politically. And so like, a multipolar world, which what you're talking about here, let's just say America goes down as a result of the Iran situation. They retreat into the Western Hemisphere and China takes over its region and Russia takes over its region. The European Union kind of takes over its region. Like they could all have very different ways of doing things. Like the BRICS and the multipolar world you were talking about before. Like, Russia could be an oligopoly, which is what people accuse it of being, or an oligarchy, sorry, which is what they accuse it of being all the time. India could remain itself as whatever particular system it is. Like, Modi seems to be a bit of a kind of an authoritarian ruler, I guess you would say. A nationalistic kind of authoritarian kind of regime. You could have like, republicanism in the US. You could have like theocracy in places like Iran or within West Asia. But like they could all still continue being like capitalistic and relying on each other in a capitalistic sense. And like, seeking to continue their existences economically through capitalism. And so like, just because we move towards what the neo-reactionaries call the Dark Enlightenment, because they want to destroy democracy as we know it, which is effectively liberal democracy, which is what they're trying to end here. That's not the end of the fucking world. That's not the end of capitalism. Capitalism could go on forever in this sense, with like varying political organizations until the capitalist system itself, like the capitalist mode of production itself, becomes kind of irrelevant and crisis prone because it's just not a feasible way of producing value anymore. It's not a feasible way of us existing anymore. And that could come about as a result of many things. Hopefully it comes about because of like overabundance, I'm hoping, for us. Like people like kind of argue that like, a super intelligent AI is going to come along one day and solve all of our economic issues, our political problems, and create such an abundant society. Everyone will have whatever they want and everyone will forget about their differences and all their grievances. And like, we'll all be fucking holding hands under the rainbow somewhere in a super abundant society. And so like, maybe that'll be the catalyst that changes the economic mode that we live under. But like, at the moment, like all these political variations under a free market system, under capitalism, like you can have so many different types of politics under capitalism because it can support so much. It is super abundant capitalism in and of itself. It is extremely productive. And you can, support all these different variations and groups of people that don't have to do much with like reproducing society much in and of itself. You don't need a massive working class even anymore in a highly advanced industrial society. And you can have all these different ways of structuring society on top of the economic base, which is capitalism. And so like you could have a multipolar world with all different types of politics, all sitting on top of capitalism. And so like, maybe the BRICS society that you're talking about, maybe it's not so far-fetched. And like we're going to move into a multipolar world soon, but it's still going to be effectively one organized on top of capitalism. And like maybe it's not such a scary thing that people are so worried about. We're just not going to have like this overarching obsession with Western style liberal democracies. And we'll just get over that. We'll get over the fact that like, okay, This country might be a bit authoritarian. Who cares? That's for them to decide. This country might be a theocracy. Okay, who cares? That's kind of for them to decide. This country might be Republican or call itself Republican. Well, who cares? That's for them to decide. What I'm really trying to ram home here is like people might actually have to come to terms with the fact that like capitalism doesn't need liberal democracy. And we've seen that because of, as you were pointing out before and we were talking about before, we've had fascism before. And capitalism did fine. If actually you could argue it flourished under fascism, depending on who you speak to.
Yeah.
So like, if you want to get all Dark Enlightenment with this discussion, there's nothing stopping the end of liberal democracy, Enlightenment democracy. If anything, it could have run its course for us.
Look, it's a depressing thought to end things on, but it's a major possibility we have to consider because, because it's just as likely that, it's I think where a lot of the Western liberal democratic societies, like all the nations, whether that's Australia, whether that's Japan, blah, 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 what they've been dealing with is, for the longest time, they have opted for the devil that they know rather than the devil that they don't, which in this way, it's America. And if America goes down, what happens? Does democracy go, or does it go because America's gone with it, or do things go in a completely different direction? Do we have illiberal societies? Do we have incredibly technocratic societies, like you were saying with China? Like, we just don't know, and it's very likely we're on the precipice of whatever is going to be for the next 100 years or 200 years. We don't know. And, should that be scary or should that be exciting? Who the fuck knows?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? And like I would say most Westerners who are used to the supremacy of capitalism with a liberal democratic political structure, I think they would be terrified to think that you could keep going but just lose the democracy part. What I'm saying is, like, it's not conclusive at all. And you can see the history of liberal democracy as we described before. When it started, liberal democracy, bourgeois democracy, the dictatorship of the bourgeois, like, it was not about fucking everyone getting in on politics. It actually, industrial capitalism did not start like that at all. It was industrial capitalism dominated by only people that had interest in the economy. Only them were involved. And like, maybe it's been pushed to its limit, and the people themselves are going to start pushing against the idea of liberal democracy, which is a natural trajectory potentially towards this idea of the Dark Enlightenment. But like, I'm not advocating that we need a CEO king. We could do it another way. But like, liberal democracy might be gone before us.
Oh no, I took it from this conversation that I guess we're getting very realpolitik at the moment. It's that like we could be on the precipice of something that just as likely might cause the people to. Well, it's honestly Murphy's Law. Like anything that can happen will happen. Like, I can't speak for the next 10 years. Maybe the people do rise up and things become incredibly democratic, and a lot of people get sacrificed along the way, but a better tomorrow happens. And just as much as the CEO's king is successful in America, and like you said, an aristocracy republic is formed, and then we have the multipolar world where China's a theocracy, Russia's an oligarchy, and so forth, so forth, and so forth.
Yeah.
It's Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
There's one thing for certain that I think was established in the 20th century is that America was the head honcho, and it told everyone what to do after World War II. And we're possibly approaching the stage of it being the sunset of the American empire, and anything can happen.
Pretty much.
And with that, we'll move on to the last segment. What's that in favour art? So, MysterE, what do you think the prompt for this one was?
I'm going to go with cyberpunk Curtis Yarvin directing society into the Dark Enlightenment. That was it, right?
So the prompt for this one was the Dark MAGA movement through the Cathedral and CEO King.
Damn, I was so close. Hey, god damn it, so close.
I knew the cyberpunk Curtis Yarvin was going to throw you off there at the front.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, but all I could think was Blade Runner. Actually, it looks very Blade Runner-esque, like film noir in the future kind of shit.
But what I find fascinating is the CEO King is almost like the Abraham Lincoln like memorial.
Yeah.
But the head's cut off.
Yeah.
The head's cut off.
Yeah, interesting. What is going on?
I don't know why the head's cut off.
That's what you do with kings.
The crown is there. Of course.
That's what you do with kings for us. Off with their head.
Okay. Right. Gotcha. Okay, and remember, everyone, thank you for tuning in today. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll give it to you, MysterE.
Thank you very much, 4AS. And yes, if you're listening, you made it this far, like, share, subscribe for more. And until next time, please remember, I am, you are, we are a MysterE.